and there was no electric power. I couldn't do my research, and so I thought I would write a book. And I started to write a book in England.
Yeah, we don't need your background, dude. We don't need your origin story. We know you're a villain. We don't need the villain's origin story. We already know this. Come on now.
Give a kind of religious background, since we are talking about religion tonight.
He probably comes out of the Church of England is probably who created this goblin. So, I mean, what does that say for the Church of England?
A harmless Anglican upbringing.
What did I say?
I never claimed that I had religion.
What did I say?
Harmless Anglican upbringing, except when they put me in the rituals and abused me. Yeah!
As you know, is a very civilized version of Christianity.
Civilized version of Christianity? It's a church started by a king that wanted a divorce and now headed by a queen. I mean, very civilized. Yeah, totally nothing to do with like first 1,000 years of Christianity, but you know, whatever.
And smells, and no creationist.
Richard, we don't need you to recount your origin story. Just get into the arguments, dude. And so I think he thinks that a lot of the atheists are always so like narcissistic that they typically will equate their reportage, biographical details, with argumentation. And they'll say things like, I never found it convincing. It never seemed convincing to me. And these are typical informal fallacies that we see all the time, right? Your psychological reporting is not an argument. Your incredulity, that's the fallacy of incredulity. The fact that you don't find it convincing is not an argument. And we see this all the time. Now, he may not be going there. He may just be trying to give some rhetorical, flair to his origin story as the story's villain or whatever. But oftentimes you will notice people doing the reporting of biographical details as if that means anything to do with the justification of an argument.
I was confirmed into the Church of England, and at the time I sincerely believed it. I had a brief period of doubt at the age of about 9.
Well, it's interesting that he says that he found Church of England Anglican theology palatable because it didn't teach creation. So, maybe people are making the connection here that when the church abandons creation, they abandon basically the central teaching of redemption. Because if Adam wasn't Adam historically, if the fall didn't happen as it happened in the description of Genesis, then Christ isn't the second Adam. And Christ doesn't renew and restore and recapitulate human nature, as Romans 8 says. You see, Romans 8 connects the cosmic scope of Christ's redemption to the cosmic scope of Adam's fall. So when you dispense with Genesis, right, the rest of the stuff doesn't make sense. And that's basically what Dickie Dawkins is saying. So Darwinism, as you notice here, will function as an alternate worldview. So even though Richard, I'm sure in his mind, sees the Darwinian thesis as a purely scientific view, what we'll realize actually is that science quite often verges out of the domain of actual science, the limitations of science, into philosophy. And that was actually one of the things that Quine's paper showed, right? Quine's paper showed that one of the dogmas of empiricism was the analytic synthetic distinction, and the attempt to try to reduce philosophy to doing the same thing as science or natural science in some way, or to parse philosophy out as only dealing with the analytic truths. It doesn't work. That rigid sort of classification structure breaks down, because at times the scientism proponents will be verging over into actually all the time, they'll be using logic and they'll be using principles that are not under the immediate purview of science or the scientific method. Likewise, people doing scientific disciplines, doing a priori research into definitions or analytic truths or pure maths or whatever, they will also be verging over into the domains of sense data and the synthetic truths. And again, that's a key point in the Quine paper. And really the point of that is just to say that empiricism as a foundationalist enterprise is done with, and it's never been saved since the time of David Hume. Okay, we just went through the Two Dogmas paper by Quine. And that's why I'm re-emphasizing this, is because you'll notice that the people like Dawkins, these kinds of people, they're operating as if philosophy, science is still in the period of the 1700s. It's like they've never looked at anything beyond whatever happened in the 1700s. And the more sophisticated they get, that is the sort of atheist, materialist crowd, when it gets into questions of justification and empiricism, they eventually realize, oh, actually, this is all smoke and mirrors, right? There is no justification for what we're doing. And that's the admission of Quine, right? I'm not saying Quine is a believer. So somebody was criticizing me as if I was saying Quine was defending theism. Of course he's not defending theism. The whole point of Father Deacon's paper is that Quine's pragmatic solution is also a failure. It's just illustrating the failures of unbelieving academia and unbelieving system building. It doesn't work. It leads to dead ends. Atheism, materialism, scientism. Dead ends. And the point is that many in academia are aware of this in philosophy, okay? Obviously not in the biological department, the biology, the life sciences. They don't care about that. They don't care about the philosophical questions is the point. And one reason they don't care is that this has been surrendered, right? Science, as Quine in the Humean tradition and many others have said, is not in the business of justification, and it can't justify. We've given up on that. And nobody has sufficiently answered this question since Hume raised it. And it will never be solved because of the logic inherent within the foundationalist enterprise itself.
Back to Oxford after about 2 years at Berkeley. And
okay, we don't need your whole CV, dude. Get to your arguments.
My career as a student of animal behavior.
Imagine if I got up there and I was like,
and when I was 19, I began to read Greg Bunton, and then at age 20, I read the works of Cornelius Van Pugh.
Everybody like, come on, dude, come on.
About 1975,
you don't have to read your CV.
There was a general strike.
Doesn't everybody know who he is anyway? I mean, like, why is he reading his CV as his introductory argument? Do atheists know anything about argumentation? I'm still mystified. Like, these pop atheists are the worst. The only way that these guys could even have an audience and a name is by being propped up intentionally by the system. I'm convinced of that, because this is just, it's all rhetoric and propaganda, especially with Sam Harris. Remember that? It was like, he's the king of emotional appeals and little to no argumentation. But, you know, that's the sad fact of what gets the masses' attention, right? So unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be listening to this.
He's got a British voice. He's smart. He must be smart. Listen to his British voice,
right? They're going to be thinking this. That's probably what convinces most people, right? Because most people don't even know what an argument is. They fall for the emotional appeals, the sort of rhetoric, the, you know, biographical details, as if that's an argument, right?
Not in spite of their Christian faith, but because of it.
This is a good point to bring up, that, you know, the scientific endeavor itself arises out of Christian history. It arises out of Christian and Orthodox universities. And the presupposition is that the universe, unified verse, underneath one God, one creator, the reason that reality is unified and meaningful is because it's created. And that was actually, if you read Newman's book on the idea of a university, that's kind of part of his point in that book. And so that the endeavor of science itself assumes a meaningful universe. And the irony is that all the people that now defend scientism, which is a cult propaganda arm of the establishment, have divested the world of meaning in totality. And so their very endeavor is itself pointless and meaningless. So, but he just admitted that science itself comes out of religious universities and religion, and man seeking for explanations via religious, theistic, transcendent causes. But now he's saying that religion stultifies that endeavor and shuts it down. Well, it can't be both. How is it both, right? So at the beginning, so he's contradicting himself, right? He admitted at the beginning that religion gives us science by virtue of questioning big questions and seeking for meaning. Oh, but actually religion shuts down science and is the enemy of science.
See later in the
So he's just giving a psychological explanation of the origins, he thinks, of religion. And that's not an argument either, right? So even if it is the case that that's your idea of why people are motivated to believe something, that's not an argument to why the position is true or false. In other words, I might be motivated psychologically or on a personal level to believe something that is completely false or happens to be completely true. So it has nothing to do with the truth or falsity of what I'm believing, you say. There's a great example that Barry Stroud gives of the beans in the jar, right? So if I had a jar full of 1,233 beans, and I just looked at the jar and I said, I firmly believe there's 1,233 beans in that jar. And I believe it because last night in my dream, Lando Calrissian came to me and told me that's how many beans are in that jar. Lando showed up in my dream. He was dressed up like Billy D. Williams in the malt liquor ads. And he said, I've got to tell you, there's 1,233 beans in that jar. And I was like, when I woke up this morning, I was like, I knew there's 1,233 beans in that jar because Lando told me. And then let's say that it turns out, even though I've not counted the beans, there was in fact 1,233 beans in the jar. Did I have good reason to believe that? Or forget Lando. Maybe I just really, really wanted there to be 1,233 beans in the jar. Right? And then it turned out that there were 1,233 beans in the jar. So my psychological motivations and my bad reasoning had nothing to do with the actual number of beans in the jar. Now, yes, it was a coincidence, right? I just happened to get it right. I got the right number of beans in the jar, baby. Let's cook them beans. Let's have some chili right now. Celebrate. But you see that the point is that even though I was right, my motivations for the belief or wanting to be the case were totally irrelevant to the fact of there being 1,233 beans in the jar. So that disproves the point that Dawkins is making, which is that I can disprove a position by looking at the motivations of why people believe or disbelieve things.